Hello Bio 2. We're in our last section of chapter 29. It's very short, and it's going to look at the form and function in invertebrates. So we're going to look at, again, comparing how all of our different invertebrates carry out the bodily functions that help them survive. And so that's kind of what the first question is asked: how do they carry out all of their different life functions? So our first one for feeding and digestion. So our simplest invertebrates, they break down food primarily through what's called intracellular digestion, and more complex animals use extracellular digestion. And so maybe just based off knowing the meaning of these root words, we could figure out what they mean, but kind of just make sure we know exactly what they mean. That is, when food is ingested inside of cells, this process is known as intracellular digestion. So this is what sponges use. So that just means, again, intra means inside, so the food is taken inside of the cells where it has to be digested. However, in extracellular digestion, kind of the exact opposite, food is broken down outside of the cells in a digestive cavity or some type of tract, and then is absorbed into the body. And our mollusks and our annelids and our arthropods and echinoderms, they all rely almost entirely on extracellular digestion. So that's, again, almost a vast majority of our invertebrates here rely only on this type of digestion. Whereas our flatworms and our cnidarians, which are two of our kind of more basic invertebrates, they use a combination of both intra and extracellular digestion. And then cnidarians and flatworms, and the reason why they kind of both use the same thing is because they both expel food, or they both ingest food and expel waste through a single opening. So the reason why they kind of rely on both is because they both have kind of a similar setup. So the food is digested in a cavity through both extracellular and intracellular means, which you can just review. But if you look, again, it's kind of, they have different body plans, but you can see they have both have a digestive cavity, and they both have a mouth and an anus. That's kind of the same opening. It comes in, it's digested kind of throughout that area, and then any waste kind of just comes right back out. So they might have a very different body plan, but their digestive systems are set up very similarly, and that can show us that there might have a little bit of relation between this group. And then again, in our more complex animals, food will enter through the mouth, and then waste will leave through the anus, which is just kind of what we typically think about when we talk about digestion and eating normally. And this is a one-way digestive tract, and since we have this one-way digestive tract, there can be very specialized regions. And so an example would be in our annelid would be a good example, because we have a mouth, then we have a pharynx, then we have a crop, then we have a gizzard, then we have an intestine. All of those part of our one-way digestive tract, and they all serve different functions to help break down food. If we go back up here, none of that is found in our cnidarians or our flatworms. And so then, again, it's kind of the same things with the arthropod, where they have a stomach and digestive glands with an intestine, a rectum, and an anus. So a lot of specialized functions along the way to help in the process of digestion when food only has to travel one way. So for our next one is respiration. So how does this differ amongst our arthropods? So all respiratory systems, no matter who you are, where you live, they have two basic requirements. So they have to have a large surface area that is in contact with either the air or the water, and that's obviously going to help with the absorption of oxygen. And then the respiratory surfaces must be moist for diffusion to occur. So in order for kind of our oxygen to kind of come in, or our CO2 to go out. So for our aquatic invertebrates, most of them respire through their skin. So that's kind of a big characteristic of that group, taking in oxygen and letting out CO2 through their skin. And then a lot of our aquatic mollusks and arthropods, and also many annelids as well, they use gills to kind of help with their gas exchange as well. And we all know that gills, they are structures that will expose a large surface area to the water. And what happens is the water comes in, it moves across the gills are able to take the oxygen out of the water, and then so it can be used by the rest of the body, and then they kind of pump the water back out through their siphons, if you remember that word. That's just a way to take in water, and then that is actually how one of our groups moved as well, if you remember that. So again, hopefully this is all review for us here. And then our terrestrial invertebrates, or terrestrial meaning they live on land, they have several types of respiratory surfaces. Remember, spiders have book lungs, and we have tracheal tubes, we have regular lungs, so those are all different ways for arthropods that live on land, or for invertebrates that live on land, to kind of carry out respiration. Remember, grasshoppers and our other insects, they use spiracles, which were the holes along the side of their body, with tracheal tubes to help them breathe. And so again, that's respiration. So now for circulation. So most complex animals have one or two hearts that move blood through their bodies in either an open or a closed circulatory system, which again, we've talked about all these before. So in our open circulatory system, it's kind of just how the name suggests, that our blood is only partially contained within a system of blood vessels, and then there's one or more hearts or heart-like organs that will pump blood through blood vessels into a system of what are known as sinuses or spongy cavities. Again, remember we said a sinus is just kind of an area where the blood can kind of gather. Again, it's not really contained at that point in time necessarily, but it is an area for it to go, so it's not just kind of randomly flowing all over the body and in places it shouldn't be. And then eventually the blood will make its way back to the heart. So again, this is our open circulatory system, and a lot of our arthropods and mollusks will have this type of system. And then in our closed circulatory system, there's a heart or heart-like organ that will force blood through vessels that extend throughout the body. So again, big difference here is that it stays inside those vessels throughout the course or through the entire time. And then the material will reach body tissues and by diffusing across the walls of the blood vessels, so it'll kind of have to pass through the blood or through our different vessels and to get into different tissues. And then these are going to be found in more larger and more active animals. So that is what we haven't made it to vertebrates yet, but that's obviously what we have. And among invertebrates, however, our closed circulatory systems are found in annelids and some mollusks as well. And so for our last thing for today is excretion, how this varies amongst our different groups. So most animals have an excretory system that rids body of waste while controlling the amount of water in the tissues. So not only does it get rid of waste, but it also kind of keeps water from building up inside the body. And in our aquatic invertebrates, ammonia, which again that's the main form of waste, will diffuse from their body tissues into the surrounding water, so it's kind of able just to pass out whenever it is needed. And then one kind of interesting example of how this changes is that flatworms, they use a network of flame cells to eliminate excess water. So again, that's a word going back to one of our earlier chapters, kind of the exact opposite of what you would think it would do. A flame cell eliminates water. And then in annelids and mollusks, urine forms in two-like structures called nephridia. So we've had that word before, as well as just another structure that helps eliminate waste. So remember nephridia. And then nephridia, fluids will enter the nephridia through openings called nephrostomes. And then the urine will leave the body through excretory pores. And then urine is highly concentrated, so very little water is lost. And then some insects, so that's just again, kind of the reason why it comes out in urine is so not too much water is lost. And then for insects and arachnids, again, this is just a word we just had, is Malphizian tubules, and these are sac-like organs that will convert ammonia into uric acid, which is kind of, again, just like urine. And then these digestive wastes are kind of form a thick paste, and they leave the body through the rectum, and again, this is just another way to help reduce water loss. So that's it for our first section of chapter 29. Let me know if you have any questions.